Hello and welcome back to the program. At least 9 people have died after flash flooding and tornadoes hit the northeast coast of the United States. Some people were trapped in flooded basements of their homes, while one body was found in a vehicle that was swept away. The governors of New York and New Jersey declared a state of emergency, and New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio called it a historic weather event. The U.S. National Weather Service said at least 7 centimeters of water had fallen in an hour in New York's Central Park, almost doubling in the rainfall record. Starting our coverage, Lebo DeSecco reports.
That car started floating!
The streets of New York as the city was hit by the fury of Storm Ida.
Oh my God, this poor person's flowing.
Roads turned into rivers as the city was deluged with rain. At least one body was pulled from a vehicle that was swept away. The city's subway network forced to a standstill as what looked like waterfalls submerged platforms, tracks and trains. Play was interrupted at the US Open, the venue's roof no match for the rain. Even leaving as the flood warning came in didn't prevent being caught in the storm.
It literally was torrential coming down from left to right. There were a number of cars that had been abandoned, sort of owners trying to get out. We spoke to one guy who'd had to climb out the window of his car as the waters were rising. And so then the bus driver, who was an absolute hero, managed to sort of carry on and pull through the water. At one point, it was probably up to sort of 2 or 3 feet in the bus itself. The water was coming through.
In neighbouring New Jersey, planes were grounded overnight, conditions too dangerous to fly. Ida hit Louisiana as a Category 4 hurricane on Sunday. The state is still reeling from its impact. It's since been pushing up across the east of the country, now a tropical storm, but still causing destruction. There have been several deaths in New York City. The mayor has declared a state of emergency for what he called a historic weather event which brought brutal flooding to the city. Lebo DeSecco, BBC News.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined by my colleague Laura Trevelyan. And Laura, you were stuck yourself on a train just a few hours ago. It just feels like everything has come to a standstill in New York, not a scene that we're used to seeing.
No, it's extraordinary. The mayor declared a state of emergency here at 11:30 last night, what he described as brutal flooding. It was the remnants of Hurricane Ida, which pummeled the Louisiana coast at the weekend. We were expecting storms here on the East Coast, but not this flash flooding. And for the first time ever in the history of New York City, the Weather Service declared a flash flooding emergency. And the subway, which is very close to ground level, it's not like the Tube in London, which is hundreds of feet underground. The subway flooded, those extraordinary scenes there in Lebo's report, and the city just coming to this morning. And it's such a reminder of how vulnerable we are to climate change, because New York City is pretty much at sea level. And I covered the hurricanes here, Irene and Sandy, 9-10 years ago. They flooded the subway too. So it's just a reminder that as these severe weather events become more frequent and more severe, because there's more moisture in the air, because the seas are warmer, that New York City is incredibly vulnerable.
It is indeed. And Laura, I was just speaking to a resident of New York a little earlier, and he said to me, and I was in New York for Sandy, he said to me, this is much worse than Sandy. Is that your assessment?
It's certainly what it feels like, because we had this wind-driven rain, and we're also seeing the flooding levels much greater. We're seeing buses almost submerged on Staten Island. And there are extraordinary scenes also in the city of Philadelphia today, where the Schuylkill River has flooded and people are being rescued from their cars. And the National Train Service, Amtrak, has had to suspend its train service between Philadelphia and Boston. This is a major artery on the East Coast. My train that I was getting yesterday from Washington to New York is still in New Jersey. I spent the night on the train, and my husband came and rescued me this morning from Metropart. But just look at what's happening in Philadelphia. This is a major city on the East Coast, people being rescued from their cars. So this is just a sign that anywhere on the East Coast where you're at sea level, that with this new extreme weather, the infrastructure is threatened. 8 people have died in the New York City area from the flooding. And the other takeaway, I think, for me is that the National Weather Service wasn't predicting this. You know, it's very good at predicting hurricanes, but not as good, it turns out, at predicting flash flooding.
Yeah, Laura, you mentioned Philadelphia. We are looking at live pictures. Extraordinary to think people could be trapped in their homes. These cars that are completely submerged. I mean, I've never seen Philadelphia look this way.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a post-apocalyptic scene, isn't it? And there are thousands and thousands of people who are without power as well across the East Coast corridor because of something that began at about 8:30 last night. And then 12 hours later, we're seeing the result. And of course, what happens with flooding, especially with a river, is that rivers burst their banks and you see the effects for a while. So we've seen flash flooding here in New York City, which is now receding. But there in Philadelphia, you're seeing the Schuylkill River has burst its banks. So it's quite extraordinary for these major cities. And just a reminder that the infrastructure here, which of course America hasn't spent money on infrastructure in many years. This is why President Biden is trying to get this big infrastructure bill through, which includes weatherproofing infrastructure for climate change. But it's a reminder of why it's so important when you think that here in New York City, pretty much paralyzed this morning, the subway virtually at a standstill, just beginning to come back, and people literally having to bail themselves out.
Laura, thanks so much for that assessment. Let's just keep you on those live pictures from Philadelphia. And as Laura was saying, there's sort of apocalyptic scenes there. I mean, emergency workers outside that home, we're not sure if someone is in there, but it's early morning in Philadelphia, about 9 o'clock in the morning. And it seems that people have woken up to their front doors being submerged in water. And clearly there are people trapped inside their homes. And as Laura was saying, people also don't have electricity. So it is a good thing that it's daytime there, but they wouldn't be able to access any of their other electrical items. So quite a devastating scene there. We can see the emergency workers outside a window and what appears to be people trapped inside.